the Avengers are traveling back to Battleworld in Secret Wars 2015, and it happens like right off the bat. It's not even like this great big huge drawn out thing. That what ends up happening is that this opens up with the Avengers basically coming up on fissures, rips in space-time, and they pass through them with the help of Scarlet Witch, who's created a kind of bubble that allows them to survive the vacuum of space. And when they pass through this in search of what's called the Grail, having no clue what's on the other side of this portal, they end up in Battleworld, or at least the remnants of Battleworld in the aftermath of Secret Wars 2015. The only person who recognizes all of this is Black Panther, and in fact he fills them in. He tells them this was Battleworld. It was created by Dr. Doom as a patchwork of different worlds during the collapse of the multiverse. Dr. Doom had the power of a god, and he ruled it like one. And so the question that has to be asked here is, how in the world did the Avengers end up in Secret Wars 2015? Well, this all ties in to the search of something called the Grail, which is tied into something called the missing moment. The great thing is that in Avengers number 29, we get this fantastic explanation on what's going on when the Avengers meet with Reed Richards. The reason why was because the Avengers had deciphered a codex that belonged to King the Conqueror. And in this conversation, Black Panther, Carol Danvers, and Storm fill both us and Reed Richards in on what's happening, which is in effect a recap of everything that's happened over the course of Jed MacKay's Avengers run. That when they talk to Reed about the missing moment, he asked the question, are you talking about some kind of ontological anomaly? And Black Panther says, yes, right? It was first brought to our attention over a year ago by King the Conqueror. Kang had been seeking the missing moment, but had run afoul of a rival in his quest and had been mortally wounded. That rival is a character named Mirrodin, who up to this point in Jed MacKay's Avengers run has just been enigmatic at best. For whatever reason that we never fully understood, he had his own Twilight Court, which was basically his version of the Avengers, quote unquote, and they were taking pot shots at the Avengers team, trying to attack them, different things like that. But we never really knew what his overall scheme was. But in response to all of this, Storm explains what the missing moment is. She says it's a single moment in all of time, inaccessible to Kang or any other time traveler, a second of time that's closed off to him. And Reed Richards, in hearing this, is just kind of like, look guys, I mean, you guys know I'm very familiar with time travel, but I gotta be honest, I've never heard of such a thing, right? A moment of time that's cordoned off to anybody who's capable of time travel. And Kang is probably the most adept when it comes to time travel. So why in the world would he come to you for help? And Tony Stark just tells him, because Kang couldn't reach it, right? Kang told us that the missing moment would only be accessed via specific circumstances. The specificity was unfortunately lacking because he was basically in a coma, right? And so Reed asked the question, what do you guys know of these conditions? And Wanda tells him, 1, a series of apocalyptic crises known as tribulation events, they would have to be overcome. We've experienced 2 of them. The arrival of the Ashen Combine, which Kane described as the fall of the Impossible City, and the Blood Hunt, which he called the Endless Night. Now, most of you guys know what Blood Hunt is. That's the story where basically Blade was possessed and led this campaign to cover Earth in an endless night. That story led directly into One World Under Doom, when at the end of Blood Hunt, Doctor Strange had to approach Victor Von Doom for help, and Doom would only help him if Doctor Strange would give Doom the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme, which he did. And then Doctor Doom did what Doctor Doom does. He just kept it for himself, right? And then eventually died at the end of One World Under Doom. The Ashen Combine was basically an Avengers story. The idea behind it was that the Ashen Combine was this group that was traveling the multiverse and just razing entire worlds, destroying them almost in their entirety. And that led to a conflict between themselves and the Avengers. Now, ultimately, the Avengers proved triumphant and locked the Ashen Combine away in the Impossible City, which was basically the vessel that the Ashen Combine were using. And so that's when the Avengers used the Impossible City as their new base of operations. A lot of you guys may have heard about that. In Jed MacKay's Avengers run, there's actually a whole story arc called The Impossible City. But the bigger point, right, as they kind of continue on with this explanation, Reed Richards says, okay, so the first one are the tribulation events. What's the second condition? Wanda says that these 2 events have to be met by heroes. And that's when we're introduced to the Twilight Court, which was basically the Avengers team, quote unquote, of Mirrodin. right? Just because of the fact that basically Mirrodin's hunting for the Grail in the same way that the Avengers are hunting for it now. But because of the fact that he has to have a team of superheroes in order to pull it off, the Twilight Court was basically his attempt to create superheroes. The Twilight Court is modeled after the Avengers in the sense that Bersalak, for example, the Construct, is modeled after Vision, Parsifal is modeled after Captain America, Lancelot is modeled after Carol Danvers, and so on. But the fact is, they're also named after the Knights of the Round Table and Arthurian legend, just because ceremonially, King Arthur and his forces were good guys. But Sam Wilson kind of continues this narrative in explaining it to Reed, and he says, "We recovered a data archive that King had compiled in his quest before he was ambushed by Mirrodin and had his knowledge stolen from his brain. It told us a lot, right? Because quite literally, Mirrodin had attacked King, and it effectively wiped his mind of all knowledge involving the tribulation events and so on. So there wasn't really anyone the Avengers could rely on to help them navigate this path to the Grail. In reality, it was just Mirrodin trying to put a block in their way, which for the most part worked. But the big point, and the reason why the Grail matters so much, is because Vision tells Reed Richards it has the ability to undo the entire universe. And Reed literally says, "I don't understand." And that's when Storm tells him the Grail is a flaw in the very structure of reality. It's nothing less than passage from this universe to the next. And Wanda tells him, in the same manner that Galactus came to our cosmos via the death of his own, the possessor of the Grail will leave our universe and signal the birth of a new one, and our universe will die to provide the energy to do so. Now, this is not the first time that Marvel's hinted at something like this. We actually saw that in the Fantastic Four run, that Reed Richards, for a brief moment, had actually left the existing universe and transitioned into the next one, or at least started to transition. He was ultimately guided back by seemingly the one above all, who told him, "You are not supposed to be here yet," and sent Reed back into the main Marvel universe, and then ultimately he was rescued by the other members of the Fantastic Four. But I simply say that to say, Marvel has been toying for quite some time with the ending of the current multiverse in Marvel and going into the new one. They've never quite taken that step, but this has led to a lot of theories online that Marvel is basically gearing up for a reboot. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's true, but a lot of people seem to think that's the case. And so when hearing all of this, Reed is just kind of like, okay, so this is a lot, right? And so he asked the question, right, is there still time? Right? Like, are there any more tribulation events that we need to deal with, right? I mean, surely there's got to be more time before all of this. And he's told by Tony, no. Right? We thought that we had more time, but the reality here is somehow or another, Mirrodin cheated. He found some way to be able to access the Grail before anybody else could. And when Reed asked the question, how in the world did this happen? The response of Storm, when we last met Kang and Mirrodin, the speculatorium of the Grandmaster was destroyed. Such a vast structure could only be powered by a portion of the Grandmaster's power primordial, which is quite literally the source of the Grandmaster's power within Marvel Comics. And you guys know who the Grandmaster is, right? Jeff Goldblum played him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in Marvel Comics, he's one of the oldest beings in existence. And he's always just basically playing games with all of existence because it's really the only way he can enjoy himself being so old. But Storm says, the destruction of the speculatorium tore a hole in the fabric of space and time. That was all part of the plan of Mirrodin. The goal was to literally rip a hole and essentially give himself a shortcut to the location of the Grail. And that's how he cheated, that instead of taking the proper path, he effectively kicked down the door. And so the question of Reed Richards, right, but where did all of this come from? Where did the flaw in the universe originate? If we understand how it originated, we can take steps to fix it. And that's where Carol says, Dr. Richards, we know where it came from. You made it, right? Could you please tell us about how our universe, the seventh cosmos, was destroyed and how you rebuilt it from nothing in the eighth cosmos? And that's when you switch over to Mirrodin, who's having a conversation with his Twilight Court. And he says, there was a time when the universe died, a time when one Earth collided with another, despite all the heroes in each world trying to stop it. But then the universe was remade, and it was remade by a man with the power of a god. And so switching back over to Reed, that's when it dawns on him, he's the one that created the Grail. Not intentionally, but he is the one who made it. And the cool thing about this is that T'Challa sits down and talks to him, and he says, I remember Battleworld. Unlike everybody else here, I remember what it was like, what we both went through. And I love that Jed MacKay kept this, because one of the things that people always forget in Secret Wars, and I actually missed it the first time I read the comic, but one thing people always forget is that when the Molecule Man took the power of the Beyonders away from Dr. Doom and gave it to Reed Richards, that at that point, T'Challa had the Infinity Gauntlet. And so when Reed starts using the power of the Beyonders to wipe away Battleworld and begin recreating the multiverse, T'Challa had used one of the Infinity Stones to protect himself from the cascading effect. So when everything was reset back to normal and he just arrived in Wakanda, he remembered everything, and he has ever since. But it is important to specify, in the aftermath of Secret Wars, there were other people who remembered, but it was contextual. It was really based on the story. For example, there was a Brian Michael Bendis story with Jessica Jones, I think, where like some guy killed his wife because he remembered that the universe had reset, right? He knew that the universe they were in is not the same one they were in before. And so while he didn't know the details of it all, the fact is that the woman he was married to, his argument was, that's not my wife. The universe reset. Something was different here, right? And so she's not the woman that I originally married because this is not the universe that we were in before. It was small little moments like that within Marvel Comics, but by and large, most people don't remember any of it. And so T'Challa talks to Reed and says, you rebuilt an entire universe, you, a human being, and nothing made by a human is without a flaw, because whatever else you are, Reed, you're an adventurer. I believe that you created the missing moment, created the Grail, because you cannot imagine a world without something to strive for, a ticket to an entirely new frontier. But the Grail was never meant to be seized, only striven for. In seizing it, the universe's purpose is finished, its potential exhausted. And so in effect, the Grail is a reset button for all of creation. But with the Avengers here gaining all the information they need and knowing where they have to go, that's when they travel to the portal. And so the last little tidbit before we jump back to where we started is that Mirrodin ends up meeting with the Grandmaster, right? And while Mirrodin does have his Twilight Court, the reality here is that he actually ends up trading them to Grandmaster as kind of an apology, or at least some kind of payment for destroying the Grandmaster's base, right, his speculatorium, and opening a rift in space. He needed to do that in order to create a shortcut, but payment is forthcoming. So quite literally, he gives his Twilight Court to the Grandmaster, and in his anger, right, in order to make Mirrodin suffer in the same way that the Grandmaster suffered, right, you cut me, so I'm going to cut you back, he basically destroys the Twilight Court insofar as he whisks them off to another reality. And the Twilight Court themselves feel betrayed, right? They're pretty pissed off by it all. And so jumping back to Battleworld, Mirrodin's already here, and he already has possession of the Grail. Now, possessing it in the moment isn't really the most important thing, because the Grail kind of has to energize and basically ramp itself up before you can actually use it to wipe out the existing universe and then go into the next iteration of creation. And so this effectively leads to a fight between the Avengers and not really Mirrodin directly. Instead, it's the forces of Mirrodin, but not in the way you think, because Mirrodin says the Grail is still initializing, but it lends me sufficient power to toss you aside, as it gives me rulership over this broken land and its broken inhabitants. And at that point, Vision asks, inhabitants, like, who still resides in this place, right? It's literally just kind of out there in existence. No one exists here anymore. And even Sam Wilson says, nothing can live here. And the response of Mirrodin, oh, Captain America, who said anything about living? And that's when you find out Marvel zombies are still here, right? Now, this is one of the cool moments, and it's one of the reasons why the story has so many callbacks to Secret Wars 2015, because with T'Challa being the only one who remembers everything going on here, he's the source of information. And Carol asks him, what are we looking at? And Iron Man's just like, they're zombies, Carol. What do you think we're looking at? Right, but Black Panther is just like, one of 3 forbidden domains of Battleworld was the Deadlands, inhabited by the endless legions of the animate dead. And when Sam Wilson asked the question, why are they dressed like this? The response of Black Panther, because they're superhuman, Sam. Don't get bit, or you will turn into one. Now, for those of you guys who never read Secret Wars 2015, this is true. Right? It's one of the coolest things. So you had 3 forbidden areas. The first one was, of course, again, Marvel zombies. The second one was Ultron robots. And the third one was the forces of Annihilus. That what you had quite literally around all the kingdoms of Battleworld was a wall. It just encircled the entire thing. And it was created by Ben Grimm. Ben Grimm was the wall. It was kind of nuts. There came a point when Thanos approached Ben Grimm and got him to abandon his position as the wall and basically take up arms against Dr. Doom. Doom. But the point is, right, even in the aftermath of Secret Wars 2015, Battleworld didn't go away. In fact, there was a line of comics called Contest of Champions where Maestro Hulk resided within Battleworld and basically had different superheroes and villains from across the multiverse brought there to face off against each other. It was kind of a dope comic. It was for the most part minor characters, so it wasn't like, Iron Man fighting Jim Jaspers or something like that, but it was still a pretty cool concept. I enjoyed Contest of Champions. It was pretty fun. Plus we got the British Punisher. But the point that I'm making here is that there's a reason why this place still exists, right? It's kind of a dead location, but it still exists out there, and Marvel Zombies can pretty much survive anything, and so it makes sense that they would still be here. And so for the most part, outside of Black Panther, all the members of the Avengers are learning what the Marvel Zombies are capable of, that they are zombified versions of superheroes, but they still have all the traditional superhero powers, as most of you guys probably know from the What If stories, right? Zombified Doctor Strange can still do magic, the same thing with Enchantress, so on and so forth. And so what they're involved in here is a war of attrition, that because zombies will keep coming at them basically forever, that all that has to happen is that the Avengers stave off this attack as best they can. And that while that happens, the Grail continues to energize to the point that Mirrodin would ultimately prove triumphant. But in the midst of all of this guy comes flying through the portal, only for us to find out it's Hyperion, right? Now here's the thing about Hyperion. It's actually really, really dope the way you get him. So in Jason Aaron's run on the Avengers, you had a story called Heroes Reborn. It came out in 2021. Effectively, Phil Coulson made a deal with Mephisto to rewrite all of reality so there were no Avengers, and instead you had the Squadron Supreme of America, which was led by Hyperion. That whole reality was undone, but Hyperion survived through it all. The problem is that he had an existential crisis because the world that he came from was a world that didn't exist anymore. So he was just kind of like, what's my point now, right? The world doesn't need me to protect it because it has the Avengers and the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, and so on. And so that's when he went into Jed McKay's run. And what ended up happening is that there was a world that had been destroyed by the Ashen Combine. And so the Avengers put Hyperion in that world, so he could basically become a superhero for that world, and it would give him a sense of purpose. That's why he shows up here, because honestly, the Avengers did him a solid, so he really owes them for all of that. But the other cool thing here is that Mirrodin comments on all of this and says, now this is a surprise. And literally Carol and Hyperion and the rest of the Avengers go to confront him, and she tells him, maybe you can play your games with Kang, but we are not Kang the Conqueror. We don't fall prey in the same way that Kang does. And that's when Mirrodin tells him how true that is. But I did love to torment Kang right from the beginning. All just a bit of theater, of course, to arrange events the way that I wish them to be arranged, to make sure that all of this happened. You can't say that I didn't give him every chance, though. I even fashioned my mask as a mirror, so whenever he faced me, he would see his own face. And he says, no, Captain Marvel, you may not be Kang, but I am. Now, I think this does require a little bit of an explanation because, truth to tell, the idea of Mirrodin being Kang can throw people off. Because it's kind of like, I thought Kang was Kang or Immortus or Iron Lad. What is this madness? Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. I don't know how old you are when you're watching this video, but however old you happen to be, you've had any number of experiences over the course of your life, right? So who you were 15 years ago is drastically different than who you are now, assuming that you're old enough, right? I mean, I'm 42. So when I was 15 years old, I was a very different person than the man that I am now. I've had any number of experiences. So that 15-year-old version of me might as well be a wholly different person. In the case of Kang, it's Iron Lad, right? But me at 25 years old, right? Going to raves, taking party favors, making less than intelligent decisions, getting plastered on Thirsty Thursday for $11 because you had dollar wells and alcohol was a lot cheaper than it is now, right? That was a whole different version of me, right? That's Ramatut for Kang the Conqueror. You guys see what I'm getting at here, right? The reality here is that because Kang can manipulate time, no matter where you go in the time stream, you'll probably run into him. But the version of him that you run into is just him at some point over the course of his life. It just may happen to be that at that point in his life, he's calling himself Ramatut, or maybe he's calling himself Immortus, or maybe he's calling himself Iron Lad. But the reality here is that while they are versions of Kang, in order to keep it entertaining, Marvel treats them as different people. because his personality, when he has that name, is very different than pretty much any other version of himself. It's one of the more confusing aspects of his character, truth to tell, and Marvel Comics overcomplicates it. But what you're basically seeing here is you're seeing Kang at a point in his life when he's bored with simply just conquering worlds, that he wants to conquer everything and really just recreate reality the way that he sees fit. That's his current scheme. And as this version of himself, he's calling himself Mirrodin. And so as far as the interactions between Mirrodin and Kang the Conqueror go, it would be like you at 40 years old, going back in time to visit your 20-year-old self and just giving your 20-year-old self as much hell as humanly possible. Just wreaking havoc on your 20-year-old self. That's basically what you're talking about here. But the fact is, hopefully that makes things easier to understand. But with Hyperion joining their cause, one of the things to know is that it's not enough. Right? Because in that moment, you do have the Avengers facing off against what remains of the Marvel zombies and trying to destroy them as best they can, which for the most part, they do prove to be successful in all of this. And in fact, the way they're able to destroy all these zombies is by quite literally combining powers. That Carol Danvers is able to manipulate energy and Wanda is a source of energy. What they need is a means to basically combine those forces and destroy all the zombies. Enter Tony Stark, who's able to build weapons, bombs, different things like that. So Tony Stark literally figures out a way, just by thinking about it, to take the power of Wanda, combine it with Carol's ability to manipulate that power, and detonate it like a bomb. So the thoughts are taken by Wanda from Tony Stark's brain, put into Carol Danvers' brain, and Carol Danvers figures out exactly what she needs to do, and literally wipes out all these zombies. But anybody who knows anything about Secret Wars 2015 will tell you it wasn't just a handful of superheroes who were zombies. And even if you destroy them, they can heal and they will come back. And that's exactly what happens, right? That now the Avengers are surrounded by effectively an endless horde of zombies, and there's no real conceivable way for them to win. But that is when the Twilight Court shows back up. And the Twilight Court's pissed. Right? They were just whisked off to an alternate reality. They ended up finding their way back by quite literally hijacking what was in effect a ship of Kang the Conqueror on another reality. That's actually part of a story called Timeless. I'll pin that as a comment if you guys are interested in checking that out. But the long and short is that they basically hijack a ship and jump into the multiverse. And because time works differently there, they're traveling to all these different realities and fighting in all these battles and so on, and essentially becoming heroes, modeling themselves after the Avengers, constantly asking themselves the question, what would the Avengers do? Right? Because they were told that they were created to be heroes before they were given to the Grandmaster by Mirrodin, so they start acting that way. So by the time they show back up here, they actually join forces with the Avengers. And again, while it's not enough to destroy all the forces of the zombies, what it is able to do is allow the Avengers to buy time. And that's where the Avengers start talking about their escapades. And they literally have this conversation with Mirrodin, who at this point has just kind of donned his Kang outfit, right? Doesn't really look like Mirrodin anymore. And they talk about how their escapades during the fall of X, right? Orchis going after the X-Men and so on and so forth at the end of the Krakoa Age, that the Avengers had joined forces with the X-Men to help stave off the forces of Orchis. And the list goes on and on and on. They start running over all these escapades that they've been involved in over the course of their existence, facing off against Kang in the early days of the Avengers comics, being a part of the Blood Hunt event when they basically helped to stave off the forces of the vampires and had to fight Blade, their own teammate, despite the fact that Blade was possessed, but still trying to find a way to spare him in the process. The idea of Hyperion, right, being here from a reality that had ceased to exist, and them sending him off to a different reality in order to give him a greater sense of purpose. Every step of the way, the Avengers have always functioned as superheroes. They functioned as good guys. And for the most part, Kang doesn't know what they're talking about. He's like, what's the point of this? Like, you're telling me all these stories about your escapades. Like, so? Like, I know all this stuff. It's not really relevant to me. And the Avengers ask him, what would you consider yourself to be? Right? And he's just kind of like, I'm a hero. He says, I pursue excellence with all that I am. I strive to be the best, and I have achieved it. What else could I be called? And Sam Wilson is like, a villain? you're a bad guy, dude. Like, you're the hero of your own story, but the reality is your story is a story of a villain. So I guess you're the star villain in your story. You just tricked yourself into thinking that you're the good guy, right? And he says, your heroism exists only to yourself. There is nothing in it about helping, saving, or uplifting other people. And the response of Kang is like semantics, right? And Tony's like, I mean, maybe, but here's what it all comes down to. The Grail was created by Reed Richards, even if on a subconscious level. So, which definition of heroism do you think he subscribes to? Which definition of heroism do you think his subconscious believes in? And that's where Carol says, we're not trying to convince you that we're heroes, Kang. We were pleading our case to the Grail because the Grail was meant for heroes. And the result is that Carol seizes it. The Grail chooses the Avengers. And that's kind of the funny thing, is because Kang, in all of his arrogance, in all of his hubris, failed to understand the most fundamental thing. There is a big difference between helping other people because it makes you feel good versus helping other people because it's the right thing to do. Because the right thing to do isn't always going to make you feel good, but it is the right thing to do. And that's what's so interesting, right? That's what makes Kang so fascinating. And that's the difference between Kang and the Avengers. Kang defines himself by his own actions, but it's selfishness in the most pure sense of the word. For the Avengers, they're selfless, and that's why the Grail chooses them. But the funny thing is that Kang almost seems to get the last laugh because he's like, you guys really think it's over, right? You guys really think it's done, right? You guys are complete buffoons, right? It has just begun. The Grail has already started initializing, and what has begun cannot be stopped. Cosmic mechanisms are in motion beyond your ability to stop. The new universe is still going to be born, and its birth will destroy this one. So tell me, heroes, which one of you will you choose to hold the Grail and to survive into the next reality? And so that leaves the Avengers with a tough choice, right? If the Grail really cannot be stopped, and if we really are talking about it only being a matter of moments before the current universe is wiped away and replaced with a new one, who does get to survive into the next universe? And initially there's discussions, right? Can we blow it up? Different things like that. Tony Stark is the one that comes up with that suggestion because, you know, it's Tony Stark. Weapons manufacturing, right? Can we destroy it with guns? I love Tony Stark. But the point is, right, there's questions about, can the process be reversed? Can it be halted? Right? Is there anything that we can do? And the response of Black Panther, hypothetically, anything's possible. Realistically, we're dealing with a mechanism unlike anything any of us have ever encountered. One that was subconsciously designed by one of humanity's greatest minds, which seemingly indicates that even if Reed Richards was here, he probably wouldn't know how to bring it to an end because it was designed by his subconscious. So he's not even fully sure what all he did in order to make it work in the first place. But they're running out of time, right? Like literally the clock is counting down. So they have to figure out something. They have to figure out some manner of being able to stop this thing. And that is when they come up with an idea. Tony Stark, Black Panther, the whole 9 yards. Using the combined powers of the Avengers and the Twilight Court, they open a rift in space-time because the idea is to put it outside of the universe, to put it in a place where it cannot destroy the universe in any capacity whatsoever. But the question that has to be asked is, where would such a place be? Where would you possibly put this thing? If it's capable of wiping out any universe, then no matter what universe you put it in, it's going to reset that reality. So do you put it in the superflow, the space between universes? But if you did that, who knows what kind of cascading effect it would have, right? It could very well wipe out the entirety of the multiverse. It would be like putting a bomb in the space between the walls of a house, right? As opposed to just in a room. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it would still do the same amount of damage, but you get the point that I'm making here. You get the point that I'm making. But then they realize there is a place that they can put it. There is a place that they can send it to. And T'Challa is going to be the one to do it. That T'Challa basically steps forward and says, I will take the Grail, I will pass through the portal, and I will be there when it basically goes off. Now, it's a one-way trip, meaning T'Challa would die, but ultimately he's willing to sacrifice himself in order to save all of creation. But the funny thing is that in this moment, when he takes the Grail and gets ready to pass through, an energy blast comes flying out of nowhere, and it turns out the Ashen Combine has returned. This multiversal force, traveling the cosmos, wiping out worlds everywhere they can. But the funny thing is, they're not here long, because they don't know what they're screwing with, right? With everybody being attacked, they just pick up the Grail, right? And they're like, and what is this, right? There's great power contained here. And their whole idea is like, let's just use this power and let's just go back out into the multiverse and start attacking every single thing we can. And the initial response of the Twilight Court and the Avengers is, we can stop them, which they actually could. The combined efforts of both groups would be more than enough to destroy the Ashen Combine. The problem is the Combine is right there at the portal, and they've got the Grail in hand, and so they just walk through and ultimately escape. And that's a crazy thing, is because in the midst of that, Tony Stark is like, what the hell just happened? Right? Camelot, answer me, because Camelot is the ship that the Twilight Court arrived on, and it's a sentient ship. Technically, it's circular logic, right? The Impossible City was created by the Twilight Court, which was ultimately, it's weird time travel shenanigans and going through the multiverse, and honestly, complicates the narrative. The important thing is that the Twilight Court ship is sentient, right? And the Ashen Combine was locked away on the ship, and that's where the ship tells them they didn't escape. I let them escape. And the response of the Twilight Court is like, they took the Grail, and that's where the ship just tells them, that's exactly what I intended, right? I wanted them to take the Grail, and I wanted them to pass through the portal. And that's what the question's asked, like, why? Like, what line of logic could there possibly be in this? And the response of the city ship, I love T'Challa, and I will not let him die. So I let the Ashen Combine do what he was going to do. After all, there was only one place that we could have moved a cosmos waiting to be born. A place that is not a place, and a time that is not a time. A no place, no time that took the combined powers of the Avengers and the Twilight Court to open a path to. If a new cosmos was going to be born, destroying all that came before, then we had to send it to where and when nothing had come before. Basically, the beginnings of all things. What Jed MacKay does here is retcon the origin of the first firmament in Marvel Comics. We never learned how it came into existence in Marvel. When Al Ewing did like Ultimates and Defenders Beyond, he was just, and one day there was the first firmament. And that's it. We largely just assumed it was created by the one above all, but we never got an answer to it. This is literally a circular logic. The Avengers, through circular time travel, created the multiverse. That's the crazy thing, because when the Grail gets there, the Ashen Combine is totally obliterated when the Grail goes off. But the point is that because it is a cosmos waiting to be born, when the Grail detonates, it creates the first firmament. And as you guys know from the history of Marvel, in the video that we did on the history of Marvel's multiverse, the first firmament created the Aspirants. A civil war ensued where some of the Aspirants became Celestials. It shattered the first firmament, which gave us the first multiverse, and the multiverse cycle has been going through ever since. The multiverse and all the universes inside of it dying and being reborn again. It's a pretty dope ending to this story, to be honest with you guys, and it's a genius move by Jed MacKay. The irony of all this is that this is basically the end of the Avengers. The comic didn't get great after the first story arc until the end. It's like a phenomenal opening story, lackluster in the middle, and then an amazing end. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.